Hi, and welcome to Restore 2022. Today we're looking at Acts chapter 23 and 24. So, in summary, these two chapters, we hear how Paul stands before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, after the tribune finds out that Paul is a Roman citizen and by birth, which is extra prestigious, and becomes quite concerned that he has a proper trial. No doubt more concerned about protecting his own skin rather than Paul's. Once he finds out that there is a plan to try to kill Paul by some of the Jewish elders, he elaborately protects Paul and has him sent to Felix in Caesarea under a huge armed guard. Once his accusers arrive as well, Paul starts to give his defence to Felix. Felix listens but says he won't make any decision yet. He keeps Paul in prison, but with certain freedoms for 2 years, sending him for him now and then. Paul remains strong and boldly proclaims the message of Jesus to Felix and his wife during that time. It ends with Felix being overthrown, but leaving Paul in prison as a way to curry favour with the Jews. So, back to chapter 23, Paul is aware that the crowd has both Sadducees and Pharisees and appeals to the Pharisees as he too is a Pharisee. The Sadducees and Pharisees are two different groups within the Jewish faith that competed for control of the temple and the Sanhedrin for centuries. By the 1st century, the Sadducees were dominant. There's a reference to this in Acts 5:17, and then here in chapter 23, verse 14, when the chief priests and elders are conspiring to kill Paul, most of them were made up of Sadducees. However, the Pharisees remained an influential minority in Jerusalem and were much more well-liked than the Sadducees, who had quite an unfriendly reputation. They are primarily made up of wealthy, priestly families in Jerusalem and were unpopular. They were known to be cruel judges. When Jesus disrupted their financial interests in the temple, he was arrested and condemned. And later, James, the brother of Jesus, was killed by a Sadducean high priest. The Sadducees rejected the traditions of the Pharisees, perhaps embracing just the Pentateuch of Scripture. It was because of this view that they rejected the resurrection of the dead, spirits, and angels, as there is no explicit mention of these things in the Pentateuch. When Jesus is arguing with the Sadducees in Mark 12:18-27, Jesus meets the Sadducees on their own ground by quoting Exodus 3:6 rather than any other place in the Old Testament. So when Paul starts talking about the resurrection, it really gets the Sadducees going. And then again in that same speech, when a Pharisee suggests that Paul was perhaps visited by an angel, violence breaks out. When the tribune finds out about the plot to kill Paul from Paul's nephew, which is the first we've heard anything about Paul's family, the tribune takes it very seriously by deploying almost 500 soldiers to take him by night to Caesarea with a letter for Felix. It does make you wonder if those 40-odd Jews who had taken an oath not to eat until Paul was dead had indeed died of hunger. But according to rabbinical law, if a vow is impossible to fulfill, or if you were to break an oath, you could bring an atonement offering to the temple and are then released from that vow. So they probably didn't. On to chapter 24. So here there is quite a sharp difference between how Tertullus, the spokesman for the chief priests, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, by the way, who have now arrived to accuse Paul and who was thought to have actually been a Gentile lawyer, addresses Felix compared to Paul. He tries to flatter Felix by starting with, "Since through you we have enjoyed much peace," when actually they have experienced the least peaceful term of any Roman administrator. Felix was known for bribe-taking and was hated by the Jews. Paul's words, in contrast, are brief and honest. He denies 2 out of the 3 charges made against him. The first charge, stirring up riots, would have been the most serious charge, threatening Roman peace. The second he is accused of is being a Christian ringleader, which he accepts. And the third charge, profaning the temple, he also flatly denies. Paul argues that 12 days is barely enough time to stir up riots. As for profaning the temple, he begins to explain what he was doing in the temple, not profaning it, but he stops himself as he realizes that the people that should really be here to accuse him are the Jews from Asia. It is Roman law that a face-to-face should happen between the accusers and the accused. Felix doesn't make a decision here, and puts him in prison, but with liberties, no doubt due to his Roman citizenship. He spends the next 2 years speaking with Felix and his wife, who was a Jew, about Jesus. Paul did not flatter this man who had the power of life and death over him, but boldly proclaimed the gospel. Justice and self-control were among the favoured topics of many moralists at this time, but future judgment was probably not the side of Jewish teaching Felix was used to hearing. He probably recognised Paul's innocence, but was more concerned about currying favour with his constituents. He was also hoping to get a bribe from Paul during these 2 years. I do wonder when it occurred to him that that wasn't going to happen. The Lord had come to Paul just before he was taken to Caesarea to see Felix, and was told that he would appear in Rome to testify. This encouragement must have been what kept him so bold and so focused throughout this time, and also knowing that it was going to end in him going to Rome at some point to testify.